It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Hello everyone, my name is Jenna, but you guys can call me Jen, and welcome back to my channel! Welcome to my official Jane Austen ranking video. I am so excited about this because I've been looking forward to filming a Jane Austen ranking video for so long. I am just, yes, 10 out of 10, incredible. And I've been working towards filming this video for a fair little bit of time because I have A, had to finish reading all of Jane Austen's completed novels, and B, had to reread a few because it had been a long time since I last read them and I needed to refresh my mind on where they were in my standings. So, if you did not know, there are 6 completed novels by Jane Austen. That does not include Lady Susan, that does not include Love and Friendship or any of her juvenilia. That is just the completed novels. Yes, I only have 5 here. That's because I don't have Northanger Abbey in this particular edition. I do have it in this edition, so we'll do this instead. So we have 6 completed novels, and today we're gonna chat about them. All right, so before we get into the actual ranking, I should probably do a little bit of explaining as to Jane Austen and her life. So if you are wondering, Jen, what the hell is the juvenilia? That is Jane Austen's really early work. Like, I'm talking when she was a child, like 9, 10, 11 years old. She would write and write and write. She obviously did pretty well with it because we still study the juvenilia today. I studied it in university and I absolutely loved it. It was so interesting to see where Jane started and how the elements of her stories that she used when she was like 11 came into her big works like Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion and stuff like that. Even though they were really short, they were still super fun and jam-packed with the typical Jane Austen drama that we are well aware of. After that, she wrote Lady Susan, which is her epistolary novel. Now, the word epistolary means written entirely through the form of letters. It is a letter-based narrative, which is so interesting to me. And Lady Susan is quite honestly the funniest piece of literature that I've read in a long time. It is so whip smart and it just is fantastic. If you know anything about Jane Austen's life, you know that she herself had a relationship pretty close to the one that Lady Susan does with her niece in the story that like Jane and her niece Cassandra had. I do believe that there is a book released of Jane's letters to Cassandra called My Beautiful Cassandra. I think that's what that book is. I have not been able to get my hands on it yet. She's just an incredible, incredible author. She was born in 1775, so even in here it tells you the books that were published that were also Jane's, like she would be reading them around that time, such as Frances Burney's Evelina, which my professor in university, because I took a Jane Austen class, she said that that is essentially Pride and Prejudice before Pride and Prejudice was a thing, and that Jane read Evelina, loved it, and it was like her inspiration for Pride and Prejudice. Also, Mary Wollstonecraft published A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, so right around the time that Jane was living, she would have read it. It was very important in her life and all that kind of stuff. So this was also around the time of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars as well. This is when Anne Radcliffe wrote The Mysteries of Udolpho. Like, it was an incredibly prolific time, and Jane was growing up in this time and writing in this time, which we can see in all of her work. It comes through so beautifully. But okay, so she first wrote Eleanor and Marianne, which was a very first edition, like a first draft of Sense and Sensibility, which is really fun. Then she wrote First Impressions, which was a first version, a first draft of Pride and Prejudice. And she tried to get that one published and it was refused. Then she wrote an early version of Northanger Abbey. She started writing the Watsons. She ended up selling Northanger Abbey to a publisher, but it was never published. Sense and Sensibility was published. Pride and Prejudice was then published. Mansfield Park was published. Emma was published. And then her health started to deteriorate as she was finishing Persuasion, and she bought back Susan from her publisher, which was Northanger Abbey. She started work on Sanditon, but before she could finish that work or get her Northanger Abbey published, she unfortunately passed away, and then her brother Henry saw the publication of Northanger Abbey and Persuasion post her death. So she's had an incredibly prolific life, and all of her works that she's then written are incredible, and they've lasted until today. And even today, like throughout all of popular culture, we have had the Darcy fever with the 1995 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice with Colin Firth. The Darcy fever was huge back then when it was released because Colin Firth in that miniseries is exceptional. We've had modern day retellings of these stories like Clueless, which is an adaptation of Emma. And we've also had a rise in Regency and historical romance really recently with Bridgerton, which is, this whole era is just incredible, and I'm so happy to be talking about it today. And if you could not tell, I absolutely love Jane Austen and this entire era, and I just love these books so much. So I've been rambling on enough. Let's get to these ratings, shall we? So as I said at the beginning of this video, I'm not going to include any of the Juvenilia or Lady Susan. I am only going to be talking about these 6 books. I'm going to preface this is that I love them all. They all have a 4-star or higher in my opinion. So it's not really a dislike to a love. It is a like to love or a love to love even, because I just love it all so much and it's just fantastic. So starting at the bottom, and we will go to the end, we have the 2 books that I have most recently read for the first time and are Jane's 2 most serious books, because Jane wrote a ton of comedies like Emma and Northanger Abbey, which is a satire, and we have Pride and Prejudice, which is very lighthearted, and we have Sense and Sensibility, which is very close to that. But Sense and Sensibility then kind of branches into the more serious books, which are Mansfield Park and Persuasion. And I actually really enjoyed Mansfield Park because I went in knowing that it wasn't as lighthearted and as funny as Emma was, right? Which is peak comedy for Jane Austen. But it is still near the bottom of this list. So the bottom of my Jane Austen ranking is Persuasion. Now, I am planning on rereading this one in the next month and a bit because it is part of Desi's Jane Austen book club that she's doing, and we have reached Persuasion. But I did read this last summer for the first time, so it is pretty recent in my memory, and it was really lovely. It is a lovely slice of soft, unrequited, and second chance love. It is about Anne Elliot and Frederick Wentworth, who at one point were deeply in love, had a love story to rival Darcy and Lizzie's, but her family persuaded her not to marry him because he wasn't very high up in any rankings. He didn't really have any money or status, so they persuaded her not to marry him. And since then, she has held on to this flame and she still deeply loves him. And she's so easily persuaded by her family to do stuff that by the end of it, you're just rooting for Anne to do what she wants. And she does. Obviously, it's a love story between her and Captain Wentworth because he comes back into the picture and he has more status and all this kind of stuff. But what I really loved most about this book is that it feels like a complete culmination of all of Jane Austen's other books wrapped up in one. We have the elements of Pride and Prejudice with the letter in here. There's a beautiful letter written in here. We have just the family dynamics and the crazy characters that we know from Emma, and it's incredible. This truly feels like the peak of Jane Austen's work because it was the last finished novel that she was able to write. So it is a great slice, a little baby slice of what Jane Austen's work is like, and I really, really enjoyed it. But it is at the bottom. I do enjoy it the least, but I still really love it. And I'm excited to reread it to see if my opinion of it changes at all the second go around, because I know that with the other books, the rereads just made the books even better, in my opinion. These are just the books that you go back to and you reread and re-see different things that are in them, and you just fall in love with them again. So yeah, number 6 is Persuasion. So that then brings us to the next one, which is also Jane Austen's serious work, which is Mansfield Park. This one is probably the least loved Austen out of all of them. Even back when Jane Austen was writing this and shared it with her family, all of them were like, why? Why is Fanny so terrible and so bland? But I think that this is such a special book because it is not funny like Pride and Prejudice and lighthearted and like Emma, and it's more serious. It's a look at more social issues in this. You have Fanny Price, who is a poor girl who gets taken in by a family. I believe it's her uncle's family, and her only friend is her cousin Edmund, and it's just her life there. So she's taken from the poverty of her family's home and brought into this more upper lifestyle, but she's treated pretty terribly, and she's not really seen as this beautiful, dramatic girl. She's kind of just a wallflower. She's there for her aunt's needs, and she's very quiet. It is quite beautiful to go through this and really see the evolution that Fanny goes through, how life at this time was for girls like her who were born into a family quite poor, yet had the ability to be taken by richer aunts and uncles, even though those richer aunts and uncles really don't treat her very well. I know a lot of people really don't like also the love match in here because it is between cousins. That was very, very popular at the time. It happened all the time back in the day, where cousins marrying cousins, and I know today we all like really cringe at that, but Edmund is Fanny's only real friend, and I don't like Edmund or Fanny for that matter. But this book was just, I really enjoyed it for its subtleties and for its conversation that it had at a whole. And I did enjoy it more than Persuasion, which is very interesting because it is definitely a like least favorite across the board with everybody else in the world, apparently. But that brings us to the 4 more lighthearted books. Number 4 on my list, on my ranking list, is Northanger Abbey, which is Jane Austen's kind of spoofy, satirical, and analysis of the Gothic genre and all of these cliches that we've at least come to know that were brought up in works such as Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho, which is mentioned in here, and it's just great. This entire book is jam-packed full of jokes and little things that we wouldn't catch on to because we weren't reading this at the time that it was published. And even people who were reading this book when it was published weren't reading it at the time that it was written, that it was supposed to be like very, very contemporary in. So even some of that probably was distance from it because the publisher never published it when Jane sold it to them, and it was published years after it was meant to be. I just think that's so interesting. The like historical context of these books is so cool, but the cultural context of Northanger Abbey is ridiculously interesting. And if you guys want to learn more about it, there are podcasts, like one podcast comes to mind, it's called Bonnets at Dawn. They did an entire Northanger Abbey series as part of their podcast, and they had experts come on and talk about it and the contemporary jokes and notions and things that happen in this book that we wouldn't have really caught on to if we aren't completely well-versed in this world. But I find it so good and so enjoyable, and it's so fast. It is her smallest book, I do believe. It's either this one or Persuasion. It's just so funny, and the witticism in this, it's just, Jane is so funny and so smart, and in this, she breaks the fourth wall many times and has like these very interesting authors, like talks to the reader. It is fabulous and it's so good. I love it so much. It's a little bit more of a spoofy kind of a read than her other ones are, but that just makes it really fun and really enjoyable. So yeah, number 4. This one is about Catherine Morland, who basically goes to Bath for a little bit of time to be like introduced into society. Again, she's from a more working class family that is a little bit too busy to really pay attention to her. So she goes and she spends time with some family friends, and she meets other people in Bath, and she makes more friends out there, and then she meets Henry Tilney and his sister, and then she gets invited by the Tilneys to go stay with them at Northanger Abbey. And it's just her like getting all caught up in the books that she's reading and seeing these gothic elements from these books in real life, and then coming to realize that that's ridiculous. No, they're not actually real. And it's just so lovely. And I know a lot of people really, really like Mr. Tilney in this because he's just really funny, and he has such a fun brain that he like can go toe to toe with the wittier people in this book. And it's a good time. All right, top 3. You guys can probably already guess what my top one is, but number 3 is Sense and Sensibility. I really like this book. I know a lot of people say that it is quite similar to Pride and Prejudice, but I love the family dynamics in this book with the 2 sisters, Eleanor and Marianne. We have the sense and the drastic contrast with the romantic sensibility that is Marianne, and we have Eleanor, who is almost too sensible, but she's the one who like really carries her family on her back, and she's just like tired of everybody's shit. And it's great. This one is just so lovely and so summery to me. I don't know why. It just feels great. And the adaptation of this with Alan Rickman is pretty great. Yeah, it's a fantastic time. And I really like this. I really like this book. It's just so like lighthearted, yet still on the serious side. And it just deals with this family of women who get kicked out of their house because their father/husband passes away, and his whole estate is being taken over by the brother, and the brother basically kicks them out and like sends them to live on a really, really meager allowance, and they have to go find like a little cottage somewhere, and that's where they go live, and like everything sets off from there, and I really love it. And the love stories between Eleanor and her, I can only think of Hugh Grant, to be honest. I don't remember his name. His names don't stick in my head, but we have Eleanor and her love, and then we have Marianne and John Willoughby, and also Colonel Brandon, and yeah, this book is so good too. I love it so much. These top 2 are so close together that they are separated from like the tiniest sliver of a notion. So my absolute favorite Jane Austen is Pride and Prejudice, but Emma comes in at a very close second. These 2 books are top tier favorite books. They're on my favorite books of all time list. They're just so good, and I love them so, so much. And I've read them so much now. Like this one I've read twice and watched the movie many, many times, the 2020 version. I have not yet watched the Gwyneth Paltrow version or the BBC miniseries. And then this one, I've watched the 2005 movie, the 1995 BBC miniseries, and read this book like 3 or 4 times now. And I absolutely adore it. Both of these, whenever I read them or go back to their stories in any form, feel like I'm coming home. And I love them so, 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 so much. Okay, let's talk about Emma first. This is peak, just incredible. So it is about Emma Woodhouse, who is a 21-year-old who does not want to get married. She just wants to play matchmaker, and so she does. She just plays matchmaker with the people in her village around her. She is an upper class person. She lives with her father, and she basically runs the household, and she doesn't really need to get married because she would actually be giving up a lot of her freedom to get married. And so it's her story about just her making friends with this girl who like lives at this girl's place for natural born children, the like bastard children kind of a thing, the ones that are just kind of don't have any familial attachment, orphans, that kind of a thing. Emma takes in Harriet and tries to make her into a gentle lady, and it is the story of just all the crazy people around them. Just the characters in this book are next level. We have Mrs. Bates, who is a woman who lives with her mother and her niece, I want to say, Jane Fairfax, and they are definitely lower class, and they are really hilarious. Like Miss Bates just doesn't stop talking. And then we have the Eltons, and we have Mr. Knightley, just an incredible man. And he honestly, my professor actually, when we studied this in school, she was of the opinion that Mr. Knightley is the worst. It was mainly because Mr. Knightley like groomed Emma because he is like 16 years older than her. He had a heavy hand in her life and was like grooming her to be his wife kind of a thing. Again, Emma is so strong-willed. She makes so many mistakes, but then she learns from them. Like she has such an incredible learning curve and character arc in this book. I just love it so much. And I really can't say enough about these books. And we have Pride and Prejudice, which is #1 for me. Just barely #1. These two are just top tier. Pride and Prejudice is a story about the Bennet sisters, and they're just so good. The social commentary in Pride and Prejudice is really interesting because we have the 5 Bennet sisters and their father and their mother, and Mr. Bennet has had to basically give his estate away to the nearest male family member. He could not give it to any of his daughters. So basically the whole thing is Mrs. Bennet wanting to marry off her daughters to good families so that they all have a good place to be when their father passes away and they are kicked out of their house basically by the nearest male relative, which we saw in Sense and Sensibility. The nearest male relative there, which was the brother, basically kicked them out of the house. So it's really interesting. But in this one, basically we follow all the Bennets, but our focus is on Lizzie Bennet, our main character. She is the second eldest of the Bennet sisters, and all of them are out. All of them are out in society and basically are going to balls and going to the nearest kind of small town where the military regiment is stationed, and it's a commentary on the military regiments that were huge back in the day, and it's a commentary on Mr. Bennet, who is a gentleman, but he married a little bit lower when he married Mrs. Bennet because he married for love kind of a thing, so he's kind of stuck in this slightly lower position, which is so interesting. Like there's so many social dynamics in these books. I just love it so much. And then we have Mr. Bingley, who moves in down the road, and Mrs. Bennet basically just looks at him and goes, yeah, you're gonna marry one of my daughters and we're gonna make it happen. And then it's him and Jane's love story and how Mr. Darcy, who comes along with Mr. Bingley and Mr. Bingley's sisters, they all come and they kind of have like sway over him and sway over like the whole small place that they're in. It's so good. It's got travel in it. It's got the aspects of people in the Regency era and the Victorian era who would go tour really beautiful houses, and that happens in this because Lizzie goes on a trip with her aunt and uncle, and they go and they basically end up touring Pemberley, which is Mr. Darcy's house. It was totally a thing back then to go tour houses. Like families would have a specific set like rooms that people could see, and then obviously rooms that they can't see, and they would like tour the grounds and like go around. It was just a summer thing that they would do, which I think is so funny, but also at this point in the pandemic, I would 10 out of 10 want to do that. Just go tour somebody's beautiful house right now. It sounds incredible, especially like Pemberley, which is top-notch like manor in the middle of this beautiful place. Which I love. And we just have, again, incredible character arcs with Lizzie. Lizzie is probably my favorite Jane Austen character. She is so relatable and so down to earth. And she, in this, because she's got so many sisters, she's like bounced off of all these sisters. Kitty, who's the youngest, who doesn't really know what's going on. And then you have Mary, who's like obsessed with music and just learning and doesn't really want to go to balls and stuff. And then you have Lydia, who just makes the worst decisions in this book. And then you have Jane, who's the angel of the house, basically. And then you have Lizzie, who's like the perfect medium in the middle. I just love these books so much. But yes, this is my top choice, and I'm gonna stop talking about Jane Austen now because I have been talking for way too long. Even I could just keep talking about Jane Austen forever. This is my ranking. This is it. This is all from bottom to top. This is my Jane Austen ranking. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below what your favorite Jane Austen is. Let me know down below what your favorite Jane Austen adaptation is out of any of these books, like, because I know Sanditon is really, really beloved. And of course the 2020 Emma, which is my favorite movie ever. And the 1995 BBC Pride and Prejudice is top tier. So I'm just gonna sit here and hug these books for the rest of this video. But thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in another video soon. Stay kind and keep on reading.